Hello, I'm Frank Falker with Digital Media Positioning. And I'm joined today by Martin Sines, author of the upcoming book, Secrets to Winning Government Contracts. Martin, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you joining me today to talk about an issue of great concern to many small business owners who are federal contractors, and that has to do with the shutdown of the federal government and the impact that it has on their businesses and their lives. Now, Martin, you've been a government contractor, or your company's been contracting with the federal government for many years. How many years have you been doing that?
For 12 years now.
Okay, and so you guys were affected by the last shutdown in 2013, is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and so I have some friends and clients who also are government contractors, and there's just a lot of mystery. They don't know what to do, where to turn. There's no one to call because the people that are their contact points of contact in the government agencies are not available and not at work. What would you say in general, from just a straight psychological standpoint, what's the best sort of frame of mind that they should try to adopt to try to deal with this shutdown?
Well, I think probably the best thing to do is be proactive. When you hear about a potential government shutdown occurring, 2 weeks, 4 weeks back, that's the time when you really need to start having dialogue with your program manager, with your contracting officer that you have, with the contract you hold in place, and then ask them, hey, what kind of precautions should I take? Should we postpone certain activities around the time when the shutdown is set to occur? And so I think that's probably the best thing to do, is to be proactive that way. Another thing to do is also look at all the resources that you have in play to perform on the contract, and think, what would a delay look like, a 1 week delay look like for you as a company? Should you put an order you were going to place for materials on hold, because the government shutdown might happen, 4 weeks later? Should you, should you not assign labor to a certain task, during that shutdown week that Congress might be figuring things out? So I think just a lot of, good preparation is important. You'll notice that as you get closer to shutdowns, you'll start getting communication also too from the contracting officer, from the program manager. Some will phone outreach to you through phone or email. I know I've heard from some contracting officers that pretty much tell us, hey, there could be a different contracting officer assigned after the continuing resolution or the new budget's passed. So I think that's the thing, is number one, be proactive, and then number two, keep communication very tight with your government client. Your government client being the program manager and the contracting officer.
Now, I had heard, and maybe this was incorrect, that it is not only improper, but maybe illegal for a government employee to respond to your communication while they're on furlough. Is that just a myth or a rumor? Or?
Yeah, they're not as while they're on furlough, while during a government shutdown, they're not to communicate with you, because the rule of thumb, or the law behind it is that they're not supposed to take anything from a contractor without compensation for that task. So it's kind of like that kind of is the mantra. I know there's a lot of FAR clauses in contracts that kind of will read to that effect, but for the most part, yeah, they're not going to have any communication with you, during the shutdown.
And I can see where then that makes it that much more important that you have a heightened level of communication in the days and weeks leading up to a possible shutdown.
Yeah, because and if you think about it, there could be, when the new budget's approved, there could be total reassignment of duties government workers. There could be some that that they may just kind of may not be there in their role when no one knows what will be. So that's the idea, is you don't want to take any direction from someone that may be reassigned somewhere else and may not have the authority to be giving you direction at that point.
That's very important information. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Now, is there boilerplate, in other words, fine print down deep in the contract between the federal government and the contractor that addresses an issue like this? And here's what I mean. A friend of mine has a contracting business. They perform training services to the federal government, and they were caught in a bind where their trainer is supposed to fly 3,000 miles to conduct a training class at a far distant point in the country Tuesday morning. And as of today, which is Sunday evening, there's been no resolution to this problem. So the potential existed that this small contractor was going to expend a tremendous amount of money for the airfare and the fee for the trainer and a variety of other things, and not be able to perform as specified in the contract, and thereby not be able to be paid by the government. The flip side, though, is what if instead they decided not to send the trainer 3,000 miles across the country, but then when Tuesday came, the government was open, and then they failed to perform in that function by not appearing when they'd been contracted to? I tell this story to come back to the question, is there language in the contract that says, whatever happens, it's your problem, Mr. or Mrs. Contractor, the federal government is held harmless?
Yeah, in many cases, the contract's written that way, where the government can terminate your contract at will. If it pretty much if it doesn't see value or they're not seeing the performance. So there is a lot of outs that the government has to get out of the contract with the prime vendor. So, but with that said, this is where the dialogue comes in into play before the government shutdown. So to that example, that would be a conversation I'd have with the program manager to say, hey, look, can we set up maybe set up a video conferencing training session for Tuesday, in case the budget gets passed or the continuing resolution gets passed. And that way, we're still performing our duties, and then do a makeup session in person, something like that. As an alternative. So this is where you would want to kind of pose suggestions, and you might hear from the program manager that, hey, look, let's just postpone it another week, and then set it up that way, just so we're on the safe side. We don't want to put you out having to do the training twice, even though one is through video conference and one's in person, because the friend that you have is still paying for the training session twice with the trainer. So, once you hear that kind of, and again, it comes back to relationships, right? If you have a very positive working relationship with the program manager, then they're going to be more flexible in theory and work with you in that respect. And so once you come up with some type of alternative arrangement, then it's always good to document that arrangement, right? Send a recap of the conversation in email to the program manager, and just so everyone's clear and on the same page. And that also serves as a good paper trail if the program manager switches to a new position and a new program manager fills the spot. You still have that, understanding that's in writing. Generally what I find is that, and I've dealt with just dozens, if not into the hundreds of contracts over the decade plus time we've been doing prime federal contract work, and I can tell you that very very seldom does the federal government or the program manager go back to the contract to weed through FAR clauses. It's really just when someone isn't doing something, when someone, a vendor is grossly negligent, that you're far off from the scope that you should be performing on, or something outrageous. And we've been fortunate and blessed that we haven't had that occur. So in most cases, we have a fair to very positive relationship with the government client. And based on that, you'll see the flexibility through it. But you got to talk to them, right? I mean, you can't wait till the 12th hour to go and have the conversation on Friday, because what happens is it's a big stress level. If you spend time in federal buildings, what you find is that 1 month leading to shutdown, the whole talk, the whole conversation, the whole psychology of the federal worker is based on the furlough, based on the how's it all going to work. They take classes. I mean, the government shutdown, actually, it's got to be costing taxpayers tons of money just in conferences they're having, in memo communications, and it's bizarre. I mean, you would think the earth is going to fall on its head, but whereas they always, the federal worker usually gets paid. I mean, they get paid all the time, plus they get the time off or what have you. But
and that brings up an important point. And before I get to that, though, I really appreciate what you're saying about the importance and value of relationships. I mean, I think we often think of the federal government as this nameless, faceless behemoth that, does whatever it's going to do no matter what. But as you stress in all of your trainings and your writing on this topic, it's like any other relationship, any other business relationship, and it's important to keep that communication going. But you just mentioned how the federal employees eventually will get paid. How about the federal contractors? Will they eventually get paid? Is this only going to represent a hiccup or a delay in their being paid for the work that they have performed?
Well, if they're not going to be, obviously you have the non-essential government workers are going to be off work. Anybody active duty, anybody in like an emergency type service, federal worker, they're all going to be working and paid through the shutdown. So in terms of contractors, they really kind of just take a back seat. If they're not working, those days, obviously they'll get their hours in down the line, but there is some of them will miss pay for that time. And then some will get to make up those pay through made up hours, when the government resumes business.
I see. So again, everything in terms of the contracting relationship is in the government's favor in a case like this. And you just need to be prepared that this type of thing may happen every so often.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you have, you have all the terms of the contract spelled out with the FAR clauses, on every award that you have, every contract award that you have. But really, that should just be last resort. The first thing is just to go see your federal client in person, or phone them, but don't just stop with the program manager. Also, keep in communication with the contracting officer too. Both of those parties.
Well, those were all the questions that I had for you, and I really appreciate it. It's clear from the responses you've given that you've been through this. You've been doing this federal contracting for a good period of time. You know what you're talking about. Was there anything I have not asked you about that you think is important for small business federal contractors to keep in mind when they're trying to, not lose their mind during this period?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the shutdowns usually get resolved, pretty fast. So, one shouldn't stress over that. And then also too, that just goes back to the point of having a good client mix. So, you shouldn't be solely reliant on prime federal work. You should have, a mix of commercial / industry work, working with other small businesses, and, no matter what your product or service is, you should be selling to people beyond the federal government.
Great. Well, Martin Saenz, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Frank.
Thanks again to Martin Saenz, and thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Frank Felker.